Good afternoon. Beidotsit na sin no. Ni nahaba na nit ein. Hello, my name is Red Belt. It's good to see all of you, my relatives. It's a great honor to be able to begin this event with a prayer. And before we start in prayer, I just wanted to thank all the individuals that are part of this, that put this together. That I'm particularly proud of of our tribes for their efforts. I want to acknowledge our president, Mr. Andrew Work, our other councilman, Mr. Mike Fox, and Harold Jiggins, main director of the Fort Belknap Fish and Wildlife, just for their hard work in these endeavors. As Onion people and Nakota people, we're very close to our Mother Earth and all of creation. We have many stories of how things are, how we utilize our natural world. And when I think of like the restoration of our relatives, whether it be four-legged, two-legged, winged ones, we're all part of this way of life and how we live together. And particularly proud of the Eat on the buffalo that have returned to our homelands. Bethany, Thay, the black-footed ferret, and now Noha, the swift fox. They all have meaning in our culture, and Noha has a very particular strong meaning amongst the Anin, and we call him Noha. It means that like he comes out of a hole. In Nakota, they say Tokana. And the story goes is this man at one time was out hunting for a swift fox, and he wanted to get his pelt for clothing, and so he saw this kit fox, this Noha, go into a hole, so he thought he would burn him out, and so he made a smudge out of sage and out of brush, and he started the fire to smoke that out, and he laid down after a while and he fell asleep, and in his sleep he heard singing. And pretty soon he heard that Noha grunting at him. So he kind of awoke and he pulled that brush out, and that Noha come out of that hole and looked at him, looked straight on him, and he said, "Gee, thank you. You pitied me and my family. You almost killed us, but you pitied us," he said. And he said, "For that," he said, I'm gonna give you my lodge," he said. And he said, "Look at me," he said, and he said, "Look how I'm painting," he said. He said, "Go back and use this paint." And then he sang another song to him. And then he went in to teach him about all the different songs to this lodge. And he told him, if you use this lodge, he said, you'll be able to have life, good health. And so when we bring these animals back, these four-leggeds, our relatives, that brings strength back to us as a people. And we're all relatives on this earth, and that's something that's very important to us. And so when we see our relatives, be it four-legged, winged ones, maybe the eagle, whatever it might be, come back strong, that gives us hope too as well. I think about all these apex predators, they call them, the buffalo, or these apex animals, buffalo, eagle, wolf, bear, all these animals, they're coming back, and they're coming back on the prairie, and that's a good thing. And so, in gratitude, I'll say a prayer. Please join me in whatever way you pray. Pray for a good day for our relatives, that our earth continues to heal when we see things like this come back. So in your own way, Abahat ki kepnita kini he no ani oni na hawa no pita what's in it then na pinato oni wo na no pinit then in pawn thoughts oni at ni ha ani nen na nakine na pita what's in it then in yant no kini he and indicate kini he and abine no ha bath ani they no eat then no pi get ya ni thoughts and bita wo at ni and only betan ha no pita what's in it then ikke only being in the ayohua being in the indicate Kaanea wo na nea betan here dana no than no bita wo at ni hin no pin it dan ni sitsa no I ekki wa wana binen ni ayo ho binen ayo ni nok the water it dasta on anitha. Oh, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this year's Parker Gentry Award ceremony. This is a highlight of each year at the Field Museum, and we really appreciate you joining us virtually to celebrate the exceptional environmental conservation achievements of this year's award recipients. Thank you. I would also like to add special thanks to several individuals. Terry, thank you very much for your opening ceremony prayer. A warm welcome and many of what will be the first of many congratulations to our honorees today, Andrew Work Jr. and Mike Fox of the Fort Belknap Indian community, which is the home to the Ani and Nakota nations, and to Allison Fox of the American Prairie Reserve, as well as to their colleagues who have undertaken the tremendous work that we are here to celebrate today. I would like to acknowledge that the Field Museum resides within the traditional homelands of many indigenous nations, including the Three Fires Confederacy. The museum recognizes and is grateful for the original people who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce the chair of the Parker Gentry Award Committee, Dr. Leslie D'Souza, conservation ecologist in the Keller Action Center. Over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Julian, and welcome everyone. Tonight, we honor the legacies of Ted Parker and Al Gentry and celebrate awardees in the field of conservation for the 26th year. This award has been made possible through the generous gift of an anonymous donor. Thank you for your generosity and this space to celebrate what I think is the most important work of our time, conserving the natural areas and the livelihood of people. We are honored to have received a letter from Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, congratulating our awardees and expressing her personal thanks for their efforts. If you're watching, Secretary, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you. I'm thrilled to be hosting tonight's Parker Gentry event and conservation celebration. We'd love to hear from you, so please let us know in the chat what brought you here tonight and where you're tuning in from. In addition to being your host, I'm a scientist in the field's Keller Science Action Center. We are an interdisciplinary team of scientists translating science into action. We use the latest science and the museum's incredible collection to advance community-centered conservation and improve quality of life, particularly here in the Chicago area and in the Amazon. Ted Parker and Al Gentry were phenomenal scientists and dear friends of our center. They inspired the Rapid Inventory Program, now in its 20th year. We are making remarkable conservation progress in the Amazon. The video you're about to watch will give you a glimpse of who these men were and how we continue to honor their legacy through the Parker Gentry Award.
Parker Gentry Award is an award that honors two incredible biologists, Ted Parker and Al Gentry. Ted Parker was an expert on birds. Al Gentry was an expert on plants. They were part of a team of 4 that were experts in their field. These 4 people could be dropped into the middle of nowhere and very quickly give you an assessment of why that place is special.
Ted Parker was an absolutely unique individual. He had a lifelong passion for birds.
He was unbelievable with birds, and a big part of that was focus. It was almost all that he thought about.
Even as an undergraduate at University of Arizona, Ted began to experiment with audio recording of birds, way ahead of, almost everyone else.
The clear whistled song of the undulated tinamou is a characteristic early morning sound of river edge or low-lying forest.
He showed people that working in the field and assembling good data sets about what was in a given area in the neotropics, which is some of the richest avifaunas on the planet, was actually possible, but also to be able to do it by ear. Because a lot of times in tropical forest, you're not going to see the individual species, but you will definitely hear them.
Basically, Ted heard a bird once and he remembered it forever.
He was just extraordinarily generous with everyone. And he motivated them to go after their own passions and then to use their passion to do something for conservation.
Gentry was one of the first members of the Rapid Inventory team at Conservation International. He had a long list of places that he still hadn't gotten to, places that he thought, this place is going to be really special. It needs to be protected.
That was what Al was about. That's how you make discoveries. You can't just trudge around the footsteps of other people. You got to make your own footsteps.
It was just incredible, the amount of work that he did and the variety of work that he did. He wrote the best field guide to Amazonian plants. He floated the most hypotheses. He collected the most data.
Al was very meticulous about making sure that the taxonomy in his studies, his inventories, was dead on.
And it was this kind of detail in the Rapid Inventory reports that made Gentry's contribution such an inspiration to people. It wasn't just a list of plant species. It was full of this sense of wonder and discovery and the importance of the places that they were visiting.
He was a mentor to many, many, many people. And he did that over and over again. And as I say, he did it all over the world. He certainly did it a lot in Latin America.
Gentry's impact was huge and it's lasting. I'm writing a paper right now that tests the hypothesis that Gentry published in 1990. People are still using his papers, still using the specimens that he brought back from the field, still using the photographs that he took in the field, and the ideas that he floated about tropical plant communities. For biologists of my generation, the plane crash that killed Ted and Al was one of those events that really marks you. We remember where we were when it happened.
They lost two of the greatest neotropical scientists on that day. It was really, really an enormous blow.
Incredible. This is a legacy that we as a museum want to honor forever.
The first award was given out in 1996, and there has been an award every single year since then when we can all remember Ted and Al.
And it is given every year to folks who are doing something really important to conserve biological diversity, natural heritage. But the most important thing is that they are doing work on the ground, and that it could be a model for other people. This award came together at the Field Museum because of the generosity of an anonymous donor. And I think as a museum that thinks about the past, is focused on the present and wants to change the future, this is exactly the sort of award we want to be giving out. And the legacies of Ted and Al are incredible. And to be able to celebrate that every year and at the same time focus on a new individual who's doing something amazing is really powerful.
It's always so inspiring to be reminded of the basis for this award. That was so wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for all of you out in the audience who have tuned in and have put in the chat where you're from. I'm seeing greetings from Montana, from California, from Iowa, Indiana. Thank you for being with us, and please continue to share your congratulations and questions to the speakers in the chat. They'll be monitoring throughout the program. To begin our celebration of tonight's awardees, it's my pleasure to introduce Christy Bly, Black-footed Ferret Restoration Manager from World Wildlife Fund, who will set the stage for us and take us to the Northern Great Plains. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks again, Leslie and the Field Museum for hosting this wonderful event. It is my great pleasure to be here today, honoring my friends and colleagues from the Fort Belknap Indian community and the American Prairie Reserve in their journey to restore and protect the North American Great Plains. It's a place we know not as paradise, but prairie-dice. Please come along with me and I'll take you there. There once was an ocean of grass that stretched as far as the eyes could see. It waved with the winds and was shaped by lightning-ignited wildfires and hundreds of thousands of hooves and munching mouths of the four-leggeds. It was teeming with the sounds of the winged ones singing, the prairie dogs barking, the coyotes howling, the buffalo grunting, the elk calling, the dancers dancing, the drummers drumming, and the pollinators buzzing about. Grasslands of the North American Great Plains once rivaled the African Serengeti as they were home to some of the largest assemblages of wildlife the earth has ever known. It was prairie dice. Can you see it? Can you hear it? Yet, in the 1800s, European settlers began turning native prairie, a millennia in the making, into fields of wheat, corn, and soy. Along with the plows came poisons that eliminated the four-leggeds to make way for livestock. They came and tamed, domesticated, and silenced all that once made the Great Plains so iconic. What do you see now? What do you hear now? Today, temperate grasslands are considered the most altered terrestrial ecosystem on the planet and are recognized as the most endangered ecosystem on most continents. Less than 5% of this vast area is protected, which is not enough to guarantee the survival of the wildlife that depend on them or provide the essential ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration and soil erosion control. One of 4 remaining intact grasslands is the Great Plains, which spans the heart of the North American continent. 60% of this area has been or is at moderate or high risk of conversion from native prairie to row crop agriculture. Despite these losses, however, intact grassland habitat remains and opportunities exist to restore and conserve this remarkable landscape and strengthen the communities, both human and wild, that call it home. A pulse still remains. It's the pulse of the prairie. It's the heart of the Great Plains and the heartbeats and the songs of the Fort Belknap Indian community, home to the Aninin and Nakota nations. They believe in the power of healing and are bringing life back to the prairie. The tribes of Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in northern Montana are remarkable leaders in restoring imperiled prairie wildlife to this region. They have successfully returned the plains bison, often called buffalo, black-footed ferrets, swift foxes, all iconic species whose populations declined dramatically in the late 1800s and early 1900s due to conversion of native prairie and human eradication. In the 1970s, the tribes reintroduced the plains bison to the reservation's 675,000 plus acres. This herd of about 800 bison, along with a second herd of genetically pure bison from Yellowstone National Park, are important relatives, bringing renewed health and prosperity to the people of the Fort Belknap Indian community. Biologically, these herds are helping to increase numbers of this near-threatened species, so they may serve their keystone once again on the Great Plains. The tribes of Fort Belknap have a deep historical, cultural, and spiritual connection to bison. The black-footed ferret, one of North America's most endangered mammal, is also a culturally significant species to the Fort Belknap Indian community. Ferret pelts once adorned the regalia and braids of tribal dancers, and the community of Fort Belknap believes returning the species will complete the circle of life. To honor this, they reintroduced ferrets into black-tailed prairie dog colonies at Fort Belknap during the late 1990s and again in 2013. Very notably, they were the first native nation in North America to reintroduce the black-footed ferrets to tribal lands. Their efforts are making a critical contribution to national recovery objectives, as this population is one of only 14 in the Great Plains. The swift fox, a small carnivore, no bigger than a house cat, is the latest locally extinct species that the Fort Belknap Indian community have restored. Last fall, they reintroduced swift foxes to the reservation, bringing home yet another piece of the Great Plains puzzle and the tribe's natural heritage after an absence of 51 years. The goal of the program is to establish a self-sustaining population of swift foxes on and adjacent to the reservation. This will not only expand the species' occupied range in the north and help bridge the distribution gap between populations in the north and those in the south, but it will also hugely advance swift fox restoration across the Great Plains, which is very critical for the species' persistence. Mike Fox, a tribal citizen of the Fort Belknap Indian community and state senator, summarizes well what the tribe's conservation efforts signify. We don't look at animals just as four-legged or winged. We look at them as family. This is a sentiment that has resonated among tribal members and leaders of the Fort Belknap Indian community for many, many, many years. They are the unsung conservation heroes of the Great Plains who welcome all that want to join them in their vision to conserve the native and non-native animals that reside on the Fort Belknap tribal lands and to preserve and protect the cultural values of the Aninin and Nakota people. Their leadership in prairie wildlife conservation serves as a role, serves as a model for many other native nations in the region while simultaneously contributing significantly to state and federal recovery objectives. Another pulsing heartbeat on the prairie is that of the American Prairie Reserve. One of the greatest conservation efforts in North America, the American Prairie Reserve is saving one of the world's last prairie ecosystems by creating a vast nature reserve in the northern Great Plains. Located adjacent to the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation and anchored by the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge, the American Prairie Reserve is in a region that has been shaped by wildlife and people for millennia. They are restoring and preserving this imperiled paradise for generations to come and are absolute champions of grasslands. They have a remarkably inspiring conservation of national and global importance to create the largest nature reserve in the contiguous United States that will serve as a refuge for people and wildlife, preserved forever as part of America's heritage. They are working to connect and preserve more than 3 million acres of this critical grassland habitat. And not only are they saving one of the world's last grassland ecosystems, but they are also safeguarding valuable ecosystem services such as nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, water regulation, soil erosion control, and providing habitat for myriad prairie wildlife. On the reserve, they are using a science-based approach to restoring wildlife and their habitats. In 2005, they reintroduced bison after a 120-year absence, returning this majestic species to its homeland and making a valuable contribution to its recovery. They are protecting, enhancing populations of prairie dogs, a keystone species that provides habitat and serves as a food source for 100 of other wildlife species. And among many, many, many other goals that will be discussed later, they are coordinating with tribal, state, and federal entities in the area to help achieve regional wildlife conservation goals, like partnering with the Fort Belknap Indian community to establish a swift fox population in the area. The collective conservation work of Fort Belknap Indian community and the American Prairie Reserve and the myriad partners supporting them is awe-inspiring and of national and global importance. Through decades of efforts to restore culturally and biologically significant species, their dedication to this often under-prioritized yet critically important ecosystem preserves the natural heritage found within the grasslands. Nowhere else in North America is conservation of an imperiled ecosystem and its inhabitants happening at this scale. It is legendary and it matters. What do you see now? Please join me in celebrating the Fort Belknap Indian community and the American Prairie Reserve for their unparalleled prairie wildlife and habitat conservation efforts by bringing their voices and their stories to light. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. Wow, what a breathtaking landscape. I'm honored to present the Parker Gentry Award for outstanding work in the field of conservation to our first awardee, Fort Belknap Indian Community. Here to receive the award and share about their work is Andy Work Jr., President of the Tribal Council for Fort Belknap Indian Community. Congratulations and welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Leslie. I just wanted to welcome everyone on the call or that's streaming in, wherever you're at out there in Zoom land today or throughout the country or maybe even throughout the world. And I also want to welcome any of our own tribal members or members of our community that maybe on the call here today or streaming in. Again, like Leslie said, my name is Andy Work Jr. I'm the president here for the Fort Belknap Indian Community for the Assiniboine and Gros tribes, or really the traditional names, the Ani and Nakota tribes here in Fort Belknap. I can't say how proud I am here today to receive this award. Very thankful, and just wanted to thank the Field Museum for honoring us in the work that we do. I also want to mention Ted Parker and Al Gentry. It's always good to remember the people that come before you and learning about the great work that they've done and for conservation, and watching the video again. It's important to remember that, like I said. So in their memory, I won't forget how important this work is and what they did, and as we continue to work together for conservation. I just also wanted to say that I want to thank Terry for his prayer, my relative, starting the ceremony. And I just wanted to say that I wanted to offer up my own prayers for everyone that's out there watching or listening, and the folks that are on the call here with me today. It's been a very trying year, the last year with COVID. And, you know, we're doing the best we can here in Ani Nakota country to help one another and protect and save lives here. That's been our council's focus and our staff's focus. And one of the things that I've really learned from COVID is to be thankful for what you have and not what you don't have. And, you know, I just, I'll pray about that. And, you know, as we reopen and hopefully be able to be around one another again to gather and do good things like this work here. I also, you know, personally wanted to thank my wife and my children. As of 3 months ago, I'm a new father again, and I give her the name of our tribe, my tribe, Ani on No, which means a white clay sky. And it really changed my perspective, you know, not only personally, but with my work that I do. You know, and I also wanted to give thanks to our council, who is very focused on their priorities with helping our tribal members and for conservation. And our former tribal leaders that came before us. Our priority has always been our land and what comes with it, and the other living beings that we share with our land here. And that was even before, obviously, this reservation was established. And as we move further into this Western world or Western way of doing things, we're very mindful of that, our council, and the work that we do. We're very culturally grounded, and we always make sure that we're including our Aani Nakota ways in the work that we do. And the tribes here, we're not very rich tribes here, but we're rich in our land here. And I have to mention that because almost 100% of our land is still in trust here in Fort Belknap. And that's been the highest priority, like I say, of our council and our former tribal leaders that have come before this. Even before Indian people or Native people were placed on reservations, that was our way of life. And our land is our identity, which is also our sovereignty here. And if you go back as far as when we made agreements with our treaties with the United States, we stick by those agreements, and we stick by for what we believe in our own culture, in our own ways. And we'll always stand up for what's right, to protect this land or protect the water. And it's very important that we do that, and we be mindful of that in this type of work. And even receiving an award like this, it comes natural to us, is what I believe, because it's in our DNA. It's who we are as Aani Nakota people. My grandma, who's passed on, used to tell me that people would come through here, even our reservation, and they would say, why aren't they doing anything with that land there? Why aren't they developing it? Well, my grandma used to say, we like it the way it is. And like I said, that's how our ancestors lived before the reservation was established. And that's been a priority of our leadership here and our own tribal members. And so I just wanted to mention that because it's very, important. Getting back to the other folks that I wanted to thank, our partners are too many to mention, but they know who they are. You know who you are. If you're streaming in or you're on this call, whether it's the NGOs that work with us or other conservation groups or sportsmen's groups that help us with this great work. It's important to be generous also. And so that's why we do that. And we work with these other groups. I also wanted to thank Secretary Holland for her acknowledgement and her letter. I'm very thankful for that. Up in this area, a lot of people say, you hear the term, that Montana is the last best place. Well, we feel the same here in Fort Belknap. And we're really isolated and we're really rural out here, but in my heart, I believe we're the center of the buffalo world here. And you've seen the slide earlier of Itanon, and you see Nohot now, like Terry explained. And we share this land with them, and that's a priority for us as Native people. And it's a high importance to protect that. Just wanted to acknowledge a few other people. That obviously is our Fish and Wildlife Department, the leadership of Harold Jigs Main, who you're going to see on a panel today. Senator or Council Member Fox, Mike Fox, who's been very involved in conservation work, whether it's on our council or within the Fish and Wildlife Department. My predecessor, Mark Azure, who was involved in that also, Bronx Speak Thunder, even our own biologist, Tim Bosberg, and our other staff in the Fish and Wildlife Department. Tim came back to us. I think I mentioned Bronx Speak Thunder, our buffalo manager. They do very good work. And again, I just wanted to thank the folks over at the Field Museum for honoring us. I also want to congratulate the American Prairie Reserve for receiving the award also. And we're just going to continue to do what we do as Aani Nakota people and make sure that we're leaving something better for the people that'll come after us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, President Work. We also have representing Fort Belknap, esteemed Montana State Senator Mike Fox. I'll turn it over to you to share a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon. As a former Fish and Wildlife Director, I'd like to fill in a little bit of the background, quick background on our reintroduction, our conservation efforts. As Christy had mentioned, that buffalo came back in 1974, and they were kept at a low number until 1993, and we began an expansion program. And today, as she mentioned, the herd stands at over 800 animals on 23,000 acres. And thanks to the work of Bronx Creek Thunder, who manages the herd now, that expansion program continues. Just last week, the 21st of April, the council voted to add another 3,000 acres to the buffalo pasture. So we'll have over 26,000 acres dedicated to the buffalo. And, and proudly, we were the first tribal nation to reintroduce the black-footed ferret, as Christy mentioned as well. And, but over the years, people have always asked me, why are you bringing these animals back, that were gone all this time? And what's, we have other problems, other areas to look at. And I've always told them, it's like a missing family member. We have to bring them back into our lives, to make us complete as well. And, it's just one of those things that we believe in, that they should be returned back to their, native lands. And and President Work also mentioned some of our elders who started this in the past, well before, conservation efforts were even talked about. And a lot of those folks have passed on, but getting the buffalo herd started, a lot of the old people on the Assiniboine Treaty Committee and Delmer Bigby in the land department, he helped me expand the buffalo pasture. And and then there's other organizations like the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, that helped us a lot. But in these past few years, we'd really like to thank, acknowledge our own Fish and Wildlife Department with Harold Jiggs Main as director, and then the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, Defenders of Wildlife, World Wildlife Fund, American Prairie Reserve, and the Field Museum for this Parker Gentry Award. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike and Andy from the Fort Belknap Indian community, for sharing about your work. We're going to hear a little bit more about your work in more detail when we go to the panel discussion. But now I'd love to introduce and congratulate our second awardee for this year, American Prairie Reserve. They are a principal partner in the ambitious efforts to restore these gorgeous grasslands. Here to accept the award on behalf of American Prairie Reserve is CEO Allison Fox. Congratulations, Allison, and welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. I am honored, truly, truly honored to accept this award on behalf of American Prairie's board and staff. And I'd like to start by recognizing the Aani and Nakota community. Christy said it perfectly. They are the unsung conservation heroes of the Great Plains. It is the Aani and Nakota people who have reintroduced species for decades on this landscape, as you've heard this evening. It is their stewardship of the land for centuries that should be celebrated. And it is their mentorship, friendship, and teachings that are of immeasurable value to all of us. The images you've seen tonight, I hope, have transported you already to north central Montana. We are fortunate to work on a landscape of undulating hills under Montana's dramatic big skies. The mighty Missouri River carves its way through the landscape, causing steep and dramatic breaks. There are hills and timbered areas and vast and open plains. And here, American Prairie exists to do one thing, to create the largest wildlife reserve ever assembled in the contiguous United States, a place where both people and wildlife thrive, and where the natural and cultural heritage of the region is recognized and sustained. This is an ambitious and long-term effort, a decades-long effort. Like our colleagues from the Ani and Dakota community, when we think about and plan for the future, we do so looking really many generations hence. American Prairie is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Montana. We're currently comprised of 40 staff. We're governed by a national board of directors, and we are supported by donors in all 50 states and 12 countries. This is our 20th year in business, and we're really proud to be working in this landscape. The need for a protected ecosystem, this highly endangered ecosystem, has been well articulated by others tonight. It is certainly threatened. Prairies are threatened the world over, and prairies yet have tremendous value. They sequester carbon in their vast root networks. They are home to more than 300 species of birds, nearly 100 species of mammals, and 1,600 species of plants. Here are just a few: pronghorn, North America's fastest land mammal, and this group of American avocets. We realize an American Prairie that scenes like this, when we truly had an American Serengeti in the interior of this country, aren't possible on the scale that they once were, but we do believe that it is possible to reestablish a complete ecosystem in this region of Montana. Of course, this isn't just about wildlife, as has been referenced. It's about human communities too. A protected area like American Prairie can and will be a source of social, economic, and educational benefits for communities and visitors alike, and it can contribute to both the diversity and the vitality of this region. At American Prairie, we're focused on three things. We have always been focused on three pillars, and that's land, wildlife, and people. Our land acquisition model is different than has been used in the past to protect big landscapes in this country. It is a market-based approach, and it starts with the assumption that we need to work at the ecological scale. As Christy mentioned, that's 5,000 square miles, or about 3.2 million acres of land. That is what conservation biologists recommend for a fully functioning ecosystem. We're working in an area that is native untilled prairie, that has rich wildlife history, and that has large concentrations as well of public land, which creates the leverage opportunity that makes this a project of this scale possible. Here's a map of where we're working. You've seen this before, but let me explain how it works. The anchor of this 3 million acre vision is this 1.1 million acre Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge, which runs along the Missouri River. To the west is the Upper Missouri Breaks National Monument, which is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And then surrounding the monument and the refuge are high concentrations of public land owned by the Bureau of Land Management and by the state of Montana, and managed for multiple uses, including recreation and in many cases, cattle grazing. American Prairie's model is to buy private lands in order to link together these existing public lands. So what you see represented in blue on this map are the 105,000 acres of private land in dark blue that we have bought, and the 315,000 acres of grazing leases attached to those private lands in light blue. So at 420,000 acres, the current extent of American Prairie is already 1/3 larger than Grand Teton National Park. Over time, by buying hundreds of thousands of acres of private land, we can link together a couple million acres of public land to assemble this landscape. Moving on to wildlife and wildlife restoration. Today, American Prairie is both operational and still a work in progress. Once we acquire land, we put in place management plans that allow us to maximize and emphasize biodiversity. What we're looking to see is robust and resilient wildlife populations acting in their historic ecological capacity. Restoration over the past 2 decades has included many things. Certainly the restoration of stream corridors, planting of native plant and grass species, controlled burns in some instances, removing miles and miles and miles of no longer needed fencing, and of course the restoration of a conservation bison herd. You're going to hear a lot about this work on the panel tonight. So what I want to emphasize just is that this requires collaboration. This is a heavy lift, and it requires collaboration. And whether that's through the restoration of prairie dog towns, the expansion of prairie dog towns with partners like the Defenders of Wildlife and the Humane Society, or the work that we do with the tribes and Smithsonian on our bison herd, there are a number of groups at the table here, a number of groups working in the region, universities, government entities, other NGOs, including World Wildlife Fund, and combined the expertise and resources and varying models and shared commitments of all these groups to this landscape really magnifies the power of the work that any one entity does. The third component of our mission is people, really the impact that American Prairie has and the involvement we have with both past generations and future generations. Through building the reserve, we really believe that we have a unique opportunity to reveal layers and legacies of human history, as well as to seek to engage today's tribal communities, our ranching neighbors, and new generations of explorers, students, and recreationists. American Prairie will ultimately not be successful unless we engage local communities in our vision. And we also build a national constituency of people who understand the importance of this work and the importance to the ecosystem. Starting with our visitors, we have thousands of people coming out each year to hunt and birdwatch and hike and explore these wide open landscapes, to learn from them, to celebrate their natural and cultural heritage, and really to be awed by their beauty and their complexity. So I love the comments I saw in the chat about people interested in coming out to see this place. In terms of infrastructure, so far we've built 2 campgrounds, 1 high-end safari camp, and 3 huts as part of what will eventually be a 200-mile wide hut-to-hut system. Importantly, we believe it is critical for our visitors to understand this landscape from many perspectives. The land, its native people and wildlife, native plants and wildlife, as you've heard tonight, are and continue to be essential to the life and the spirituality of Indigenous peoples. So we're honored to collaborate with Ani Nakota Tours in this regard. Together, we have established a interpretive guiding program to promote cultural awareness, to create educational and economic opportunities, and to exchange knowledge. For us at American Prairie, one of the biggest events of our year will be the opening of our National Discovery Center. This multi-purpose facility has a children's zone, it has an interpretive theater, it has an exhibit hall, and it has a conference and event pavilion. And this will allow us to greatly expand our programmatic opportunities, including those with collaborating tribes. Our American Prairie Field School, our middle school ecology program, for instance, will be based in this center. The final point I want to touch on tonight is that conservation on this scale requires that we at American Prairie look beyond our borders and collaborate with our neighbors. The reserve is and always will be surrounded by a mosaic of public and private land where the dominant industry is cattle ranching. And while many wildlife species are valued and appreciated by the community, over the long term, more ungulates and predators will have the potential to cause conflict. And this is common in protected areas the world over, as so many of you know. So the question we face is, how do we increase the social tolerance for wildlife in the region, but also ensure that our neighbors are benefiting from the presence of wildlife? We've started a program called Wild Sky. It's been in operation for about 8 years now. And the idea is to give participating landowners an incentive to have wildlife on their properties, to modify their operations to be more wildlife friendly in exchange for both financial and technical assistance. Wild Sky protocols cover everything from conserving native prairie to the installation of wildlife friendly fencing. And we have 11 landowners participating, about half of whom are from the Aani Nakota community. In conclusion, the future we see for American Prairie is a multi-jurisdictional, cooperatively managed landscape surrounded by working lands that supports the full complement of diversity and the diversity and complexity of the prairie ecosystem. It's a wildlife reserve that is a positive economic force in the region and also has secured long-term funding to take care of it in perpetuity. It's a resource for students, for scientists, for the community, for explorers, for visitors. And as was referenced earlier, really, perhaps it is an entrepreneurial model that is replicable in other biomes around the world. I want to end by thanking the Field Museum again and all of our partners, but especially the Fort Belknap Indian community. We at American Prairie are the newcomers to the region, that's for sure. And we have received nothing short of a warm welcome, a spirit of collaboration, and a willingness to explore mutual goals from the Aani and Nakota people. I value tremendously the strong and really compelling voices that they lend to both their winged and their four-legged relatives, as well as the teachings and the wisdom and the shared knowledge and the good humor that are hallmarks of each of our interactions. We at American Prairie look forward to working with our partners here for decades and generations to come. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ellison. And thanks to both Fort Belknap and American Prairie Reserve for giving us such stunning visuals, stories of your passionate commitment to conservation and collaboration. Those two pillars, conservation and partnership, are what animate the Parker Gentry Award and reflect the legacies of Ted Parker and Al Gentry. In this work and that of other Parker Gentry awardees, their memory lives on. We're grateful to have with us several members of this greater partnership that makes this world-changing conservation possible. I want to welcome our panelists to join as we explore their efforts and the stunning landscape it renews. From Fort Belknap Indian Community, we have Senator Mike Fox and Harold Jiggs Maine. From American Prairie Reserve, we have Damian Austin, Vice President and Superintendent of the Reserve, and Daniel Kinka, Wildlife Restoration Manager. From World Wildlife Fund, Christy Bly. And from the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, Hila Shimon. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start off. Mike, you alluded to this a little bit in the talk that you gave at the beginning of the event. Can you tell us a little bit more about the historical significance of the buffalo, swift fox, and the black-footed ferret, and the cultural significance of reintroducing them into the Fort Belknap area?
I need to pause.
Can we hear you, Mike?
It hasn't happened before. So, but anyway.
Can you hear us, Mike?
Our culture, bringing these animals back, especially the buffalo, but each of the different animals, plays a part in our, religion and our culture, and so each of them have a very important part to play.
And Hila, Shimon, oh, I'm so sorry. Mike, is your mic, is there, are you hearing us? I'm kind of having trouble hearing you.
This is, like I said, I don't, I'll definitely jump in where I can.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm gonna start with maybe Harold Jiggs Maine. If you could tell us a story about the most memorable reintroduction and why it was so memorable, I would love to take us there to one of those events.
Okay, they're all historical and important to me. I had we had a shared one with the buffalo with APR that was memorable to me, and you know, the ferret and also the swift fox. But I guess the most memorable one to me was the release we had with the black-footed ferrets, and we have an immersion school here, White Clay Immersion School, a language school where we have these youth from the 1st grade up to the 8th grade that go to school there, and they do a lot of cultural things in the school, and along with language and stuff. And it isn't, you know, there's only a limited amount of kids that can go into that school. So we invited them out to that release, and you know how these ferrets chatter. They got a kind of a distinctive chatter, you know. There was a lot of mosquitoes out there, and you know, we were fighting them, and they released this one particular ferret, and it went into the hole like that, and all these kids got up right close to, surrounded the hole perfectly around it like that, and they put their heads down looking to see if they could see it, and their heads were like maybe a couple of feet from the hole. All of a sudden the ferret pokes its head out and chatters really loud, and it's just like it was something blooming or mushrooming. All of those kids went back and hollered and, you know, kind of screamed and backed up and started laughing and talking. And, you know, I thought that was really something. And, you know, you know, they're probably the only kids in the world that seen something like that. And that kind of made all of us that were involved in this feel good, you know, and you know, that was, I think that's important for, you know, for the youth to see something like that, especially at that young age. You know, as they grow up and get older, they're gonna know what the ferrets are, and they're gonna probably, most of them are gonna take the time to look a little deeper into it and see what their plight was throughout history, and maybe get involved in it, you know. But that, to me, that was you know, that was the most memorable one.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's such a beautiful story. It's almost like a flower opening up as the kids
Yeah.
were coming out of the hole, and what an incredible example. And like you said, they will take that forward, that experience. So thank you for sharing. That's incredible. I want to move to Gila Shimon, who's a research ecologist with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. And can you tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing in this area and why it's so urgent?
Absolutely. First, I just want to congratulate the awardees, and I'm so honored to be here to celebrate the incredible work that Fort Belknap Indian community and American Prairie are doing in this region. Really, you guys rock. And as personally and as a researcher, I'm so grateful to be able to conduct work with both of these groups. So much of my work happens at American Prairie, and also at Fort Belknap, because both of these groups look at this region in a holistic way as one ecosystem. And myself as a researcher, it doesn't matter which taxonomic group I'm studying, I also look at this region as a whole with all that pieces. Animals don't know these boundaries. And many of the projects that I work on, whether it's a swift fox reintroduction or other ungulates, all of it also revolves one very special species, the bison. So the bison is kind of the heart of much of the work that I conduct in the region in collaboration with APR and also Fort Belknap. And it's no surprise, they have such an important role in this ecosystem. We all know the travesty of bison, from tens of millions that used to roam the Great Plains, almost eliminated completely from the earth. And thanks to really the leadership of Native nations, NGOs like American Prairie, the Department of Interior, bison are making a comeback. And we do have quite a few established conservation herds across the continent. Nothing compared to the tens of millions that used to roam, though. We're still a ways from really returning bison to the landscape. And as a researcher, when I think about these reintroductions and about bison and how they transform this landscape, I always also think about how the landscape has changed, the way that Christy presented in the beginning. we are no longer, in that stage where bison are roaming free across the landscape. This landscape is dominated by humans and the needs of the people that live within these landscapes. And we have to really open our minds and think in a very creative way to develop these applied methods that will enable us to restore these landscapes in a way that takes into account the needs of people, but also allows species like bison to carry out that evolutionary role as ecosystem engineers, to allow bison to restore these grasslands, to create habitats for other, the hundreds of species, the grassland specialists. And on Fort Belknap and APR, we collect a ton of data on plants, on insects, on other mammals, grassland birds, and we try to look at it in a holistic way and understand in that how in these confined spaces, how do bison really transform this landscape? How can we make it better? How can we manage them in the best way that we can to have the best outcomes in terms of restoration? And really the leadership of Fort Belknap and American Prairie that allow these researchers to come in and conduct and collaborate on these projects that will not only direct the work that American Prairie and Fort Belknap are doing, but hopefully will also direct management of bison in other areas across the continent. So really very thankful and congratulations to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for your important work. And that leads me kind of to a question that I was wanting to direct to Daniel Kinka, who is doing as wildlife restoration manager for American Prairie Reserve. And maybe you can give us a sense of how the reserve and how your rewilding efforts have changed the signs, the sights and the sounds on the prairie.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, and thanks everybody. Congratulations and thanks for having me. I think you've heard this story and seen the pictures to go along with it from Allison and from Christy and Dr. Shimon was just talking about this and a number of people have kind of mentioned the sights and sounds thing, but I think maybe one way I look at it, or something that resonated with me, because I'm a newcomer to the area. I've only been with American Prairie Reserve for the last 3 years, and I've only been out west for about 10. But this idea, a lot of those images you see, right, are of a prairie, even including the one that's behind me, right, are a beautiful landscape. And we talk about prairies, but prairies are really a mix of ecoregions, right? You start at the top of an island mountain range like the Little Rocky Mountains on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation that drains into rivers and tributaries and creeks that follow nice, big, healthy riparian corridors, hopefully in some cases with big cottonwoods. Those drain into grasslands, which transition into sagebrush steppe and then comes back down into the breaks through what we call the Missouri River breaks. It's cliffy habitat that's, again, alpine in nature all the way back down to the Missouri River that flows out to the Gulf of Mexico. And you've seen images of a number of those different ecotypes, right? But one of the persistent features of those images is they are empty, right? You have untilled prairie, and that is beautiful in its own way, but there's kind of a starkness to the emptiness. And what you saw in Allison's presentation was a painting that I quite like by Charlie Russell, who the National Wildlife Refuge in kind of in the middle of this region is named after. That painting's called When the Land Belonged to God. And if you recall, it's kind of a pink and purple image with a big bison herd coming up out of the Missouri River corridor. And there's a sage grouse in that picture. And there's wolves, if you know where to look in that picture. And it's this picture of wildness, right? It's the scene that you see described by like the early explorers in the region. It's what you hear about in the traditional ecological knowledge and the stories of the indigenous peoples of the region. And it's what's captured in some of the early artists like Russell. And I think that's what's missing. Those are the sights and sounds that are missing in the prairie writ large. Now we have some catching up to do to our neighbors at the Ani Nakota community over there who've been doing this rewilding work for a long time, where much of it doesn't look empty anymore. It looks a lot more like that painting, like the stories that we hear, where you see those herds of bison and they're grunting and they're moving and they're being followed by other wildlife, and prairie dogs are chirping and ferrets are sticking their head out and grunting. And now you've got swift fox moving through the grasslands as well. And that's the same image that we're trying to achieve at American Prairie Reserve. And while there's still a lot of work to go, You know, in the last 15 years, you've gone from 0 bison where the Prairie Reserve is to almost 800 bison where the Prairie Reserve is. So even though I wasn't around when those bison were introduced, for somebody like me early on when I started to be working on the reserve, looking for something, and to crest a hill, to come over a hill in a snowmobile and see a herd of bison running through feet of snow in a place where I didn't see fences. And sure, it's still empty in some ways, but to see that feature on the landscape, not an empty prairie, but a prairie full of big wildlife. This is what people talk about when they talk about the American Serengeti. It's that idea of big animals and lots of people inhabiting this space that is otherwise beautiful, but is often subjectless in images like the one behind me. And I think we're starting to restore that with the bison work that we've been engaged in for 15 years now, with prairie dog work that was mentioned. Hopefully soon we'll get some of our own swift fox and black-footed ferrets, like our neighbors at the Ani Nakota community. But it's coming back. Right now, if you were to go out there early in the morning, you can hear that guttural, I think Christy called it a drumming, which is pretty correct, of the sage-grouse, right? There are some of these sights and sounds, and they're coming back. But the task is still at hand, which is to make that place wilder, see more four-leggeds, more two-leggeds, and more winged animals all out there enjoying that beautiful country that you've seen over and over again tonight.
Oh, thank you. And thank you all for doing that work. It just sounds so lovely to hear that resurgence, that the sounds are coming back. And I'm just seeing a mosaic of partners here. And Christy, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the partnership and how this mosaic of different partners is helping to restore this landscape.
Yeah, well, Allison covered it very well, as did Mike and others earlier. But, you know, teamwork really does make the dream work. And in this case, the dream is to bring, you know, prairie wildlife back to the Great Plains in this portion of our prairie dice. And it's happening because of folks not only, you know, on Zoom today, but from federal partners like the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, the Intertribal Buffalo Council, to a myriad selection of NGOs from all of us here: American Prairie Reserve, Smithsonian, World Wildlife Fund, Defenders of Wildlife, Humane Society, Little Dog Wildlife. The list goes on and on and on. And then support from state wildlife agencies on top of it, Ani Nakota College and local universities and universities from afar. This is the prairie dice at its best because it's supported by a multitude of people who believe in the mission and who are there supporting financially and bringing technical and logistical resources to the table. And it's an amazing partnership where we are all celebrating and working hard every day to bring back what rightly belongs, and to do that in harmony with the people living on the landscape. And there's no greater good than together making this dream possible.
Thank you, Christy. I wonder, Mike, are you able to listen in, or did we get the internet issues figured out? Are you there?
I can listen in pretty good.
Okay, we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear a little bit. Yes, we can. And we'd love to hear more. So I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit. I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a delay. Mike?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Well, I think maybe if Harold Jiggs, Maine, if I could ask you this question, and I'm not sure if Mike can hear us, or I think you're hearing us, but maybe the delay is affecting your response. So I wonder, Harold Jiggs, if you could give us a little bit of the background or the historical significance, the cultural significance. Mike talked a little bit about how, reintroducing these species is bringing family members home, that these are part of your family and they're coming back. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I know you're the Director of Fish and Wildlife, and and the work that you're doing there. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the stories and the cultural significance of this reintroduction work.
Yeah, okay. I believe that, you know, that these creatures were here, you know, at one time, and for whatever reason they weren't here no more. And we believe, I guess, that you know, the Creator put everything on Earth for a reason, and there's a certain balance that goes with that, you know, and when you remove something like that, the balance isn't there, you know. It's all a part of circle of life, you know, and everything that we live with as natives, you know. We I think we're natural conservationists, and I don't know, I don't really feel like I'm doing anything special. I feel like it's just, you know, it's just what we do at Fort Belknap, and you know, it isn't only, you know, our department. We wouldn't be able to do this without the tribal council, you know, support, and they wouldn't be able to do it without the residents, the people here support. And it just, you know, it just goes on, you know. It's some of it that, you know, we lost some stories and some of the things, but you know, along with the reintroduction of these, some of these things are starting to come back up, you know. And I don't know, I just believe that it's important for us to be doing that here today, so that our future generations can live with these animals, and you know, and restore some of that balance that was lost through, you know, that nature, the balance of nature, and also, you know, the whole circle of life. Hopefully it'll, you know, we're connecting things, you know, and I think we'll all be healthier for it in the end, the more we can do. So, you know, that's kind of my story on it.
And Leslie, may I
Yeah,
just jump in for a second here?
Sure.
I have to say, this is why Fort Belknap is in part receiving this award today, because they rise above all of the difficulties that are associated with restoring species like what you see on our screens today. And though that doesn't come easily, there's a lot of political sensitivity with restoring ferrets who eat prairie dogs, with swift foxes who cross landscapes, with bison who have grass, but also who need to live near cattle. And it's the difficulties that are embraced, but also the space that is allowed for these species on the landscape and hosted also by American Prairie Reserve. This is why this place and the Fort Belknap Indian community and the American Prairie Reserve are so deserving, because there are so few places on Earth where this exists, and they are making it happen. So kudos to all of you. It's the most important work of our lifetime for this very imperiled ecosystem. I'm so proud of you.
I'm so honored to be a part of just celebrating you all. I think, you know, one of the things that when you were speaking, Harold, was I was trying to picture, I mean, I've seen these gorgeous pictures and images of this landscape. I'm dying to visit. So I'm sure many in the audience are too. But Harold, I was wondering if you could just, so what are the, in terms of like seeing a swift fox or a black-footed ferret, I mean, how is that something difficult to see, or how often do you see some of these species out in this landscape? And is it, you know, seeing them normally at dusk or at dawn, or can you tell me a little bit about their behavior and when you might see a swift fox, and are they solitary?
I don't know, probably the swift fox, probably, you know, you'd be more likely to see it from the highway driving on the road, I think, because they're, you know, they go along for, roadkill is a lot of how they survive. And, you know, unfortunately, they also, you know, there's some mortality associated with that. But, you know, in tracking, some of that tracking, that reports that came to us, they've kind of gone quite a ways and made a big circle, you know, and I think it's just by chance that you might see one, you know. We've had reports of people mainly seeing them on alongside the highways. As far as a ferret goes, I don't know. I think they're a nocturnal animal, and And, you know, the the guys who go do the surveys, you could probably ask Jessica Alexander and them about that, because they do all the spotlighting, and Tim and, you know, them, they do the spotlighting and do the capturing and all of that stuff with them. But I know one time there was in the daytime, I was fortunate to see one, and I think I was filming it. I might have it on camera, I don't know. But we were having a buffalo roundup in the Snake Butte pasture, and all of the buffalo were going across the land like that. And then right in the middle of them, all of a sudden a ferret pops up, and he kind of looks around, you know. I kind of got a kick out of that, because it kind of reminded me like he was somebody that was trying to, you know, catch a little rest and some sleep there. And this big old thundering something woke him up, and he peeked out to see what was going on, you know. And, you know, I think that was fortunate to see that. But, you know, I don't think you see too many of them in a day, the ferrets, you know.
Mm-hmm. So. And I think someone, and maybe it was Hila or Christy in another conversation, what are the populations like of these individuals, I'm sorry, the black-footed ferret and the swift fox?
After you, Hila.
Perfect. Yeah. So for swift fox, this is very new. We just started the reintroduction last year when we released the first 27 individuals on Fort Belknap. And this year we're planning to translocate about 60 more individuals. So hopefully we're going to have some dens with new kits this year and new recruits on Fort Belknap. So everything is very, very new, and there's just a few individuals. By the end of our 5-year program, we hope to have the established population on Fort Belknap. We're talking about almost 250 animals that we plan to translocate, and these will breed and start moving around, and that's how we're going to fill up this landscape.
That's
Do you want to take the ferrets?
That's great. No, that's exciting. I want to move to a question to Damien. I'm sorry. Damien, I see the time is getting away, and so I don't want to lose track of time, but I really want to hear a little bit more about where the work between the Fort Belknap Indian community and American Prairie Reserve overlap.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to congratulate our partners and our friends in the Ohlone Nakota community. You guys are very deserving of this award, and I'm proud to receive it with you. But yeah, as far as overlap in the work that we're doing, there's a lot. Everywhere from, you know, stewardship of the land, which we've been doing for about 20 years, and the Ohlone Nakota community have been doing for thousands of years, to the, you know, reintroduction of wildlife that's been talked about. We've started with bison reintroduction, and hopefully you're going to be following in our neighbors' footsteps with swift fox and black-footed ferret soon as well. And, you know, one of the other areas that's also been mentioned is the celebration of natural and cultural heritage. And that's something that we've been working with the Ohlone Nakota Tours on, and I think will just expand and grow over time as more and more visitors come to the area to see both what's going on in the Ohlone Nakota community and on American Prairie Reserve.
Thank you, Damien. I wanted to open up the floor for if anybody on the panel wanted to share any last stories or any last things that you want to share about your work in this landscape and your partnership.
Well, I would probably just like to, you know, close by saying that I appreciate all of the, you know, the support from our like I said, our tribal government and, you know, our people here on Fort Belknap. And also, you know, all of the partners, there's so many of them, some that probably weren't even mentioned yet today in all of this work over the years, you know, and the past directors and past councilmen that have been involved in this, you know, it just it just carries on naturally by itself with, I feel, with our department. There's no, all of a sudden, like, with the swift fox, all of a sudden they just, something happened, and, be kind of in a blink of an eye to me. Before I knew it, they were, going to get the swift foxes from another state to get ready for the, the reintroduction. And, it just happens. And I'd really like to thank all of the partners, that have been involved in it, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. If you don't mind, I'd love to ask one more question. As a scientist, I'm thinking about the field work that's happening in this region. I'm also thinking about what field work might be like under the stars, the Northern Lights potentially. But I'm thinking about, Gila, some of the work that you're doing with the understanding how these species, the reintroduction of the buffalo and the swift fox and the black-footed ferret, are reshaping the landscape and affecting other grassland species. Can you speak to a little bit about how the reintroduction work is affecting and shaping this ecosystem?
Sure, absolutely. So I think Harold said that in one of our previous conversations, in how the Native people view the species. It's all linked together, and it's the same as ecologists. We know it's a whole web, right? And if there's a link missing in that web, then something is not regulating another level. So when you're reintroducing these species back, you're just pacing back that puzzle together. And then every piece of the puzzle has a different impact. So bison, I think, are key. They have this important function in this ecosystem. Their movement, the way the entire herd is moving together, interacting with one another, making these collective movements together, how the grandmothers are leading those herds and the daughters that are following and the calves. All of those movements, those grazing behaviors transform the vegetation that in turn would insect communities or the arthropods that we're going to find in these grasslands. And that would affect the grassland specialists that come to eat these insects and so on, or how bison create these grazing lawns that other ungulates can come and forage on later on. They're manipulating the grasses, making them greener for longer time. And that makes that forage more nutritious. So many little things that add up together that create a much richer landscape. And we're seeing it, and we're also gathering evidence to show it.
Thank you, Gila. I want Christy, if you could maybe share what you wrote in the chat in case anybody missed it, because I think it's really important what you shared about the black-footed ferret and why it kind of speaks to why this conservation work is important.
Yeah, so in order to recover the endangered black-footed ferret, we are looking for 3,000 individuals in the wild in 30 or more places. And currently, there are fewer than 400 ferrets in the wild today. Fort Belknap hosts 21 of those. So nearly 5% of the population lives at Fort Belknap, which is a significant contribution, not only to local reintroduction and recovery goals, but nationally. And it is just of monumental importance that this work happens and that there's space for it. And I just wanted to snap to what Gila was saying a little bit, that the prairie ecosystem comes alive when you put the right pieces in it. So if you were to walk out on a prairie dog town on American Prairie Reserve or Fort Belknap today, it's almost deafening because there are so many species that are there. And the prairie dogs are barking at you, and there are winged ones flying over, and there are coyotes running through and badgers peering out of holes. And without that there, it's like a ghost town. So it really does matter. Prairie dogs are the chicken McNuggets of the prairie. Everybody eats them or they live in their burrows. And so those pieces are really important. And it's just incredible to have these landscapes where they can thrive again. Congratulations again, Fort Belknap, American Prairie Reserve. You are inspirational, and this is some of the most important work we can do in our lifetime.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you everyone on the panel for sharing your stories, your histories, and your lives in this magnificent place. I'm eager to visit, and like I said before, I'm sure many out in the audience who are not tuning in from that region are eager to visit as well. Another huge congratulations to Fort Belknap and American Prairie Reserve for your extraordinary work you're doing to restore the Northern Great Plains. We have a small gift for you. This is a beautiful watercolor, it should be popping up soon, of a buffalo from the Field Museum's artist in residence, Peggy McNamara, which is on its way to both of you as a keepsake from and a reminder of the Field Museum and your Parker Gentry Award. Thank you for this work that ensures that future generations will have the opportunity to walk across this landscape and see the swift fox and the black-footed ferret and hear the roaring hooves of hundreds of buffaloes running across the plains. We're so grateful to you all who've joined us tonight. Thank you again and have a good evening.